Greetings everyone, I'm Kevin, and today I'm doing the second part of the book recommendations from around the world. So just as I did for the science fiction and fantasy recommendations, I'm going to go through every book in order from continent, not country or any kind of rating or anything like that. So I'm going to start with Africa and then go to Asia and work my way down alphabetically. And today I'm focusing on contemporary and historical. I felt like it would be just easier to group them together the way that I did with science fiction and fantasy. So in my other video you got fantastical elements, high technology, not our world basically. But today you're getting our world, no magic, no futuristic elements, high technology, stuff like that. It's our world or like our contemporary or history. That's today. So starting with Africa, I wanted to begin with a little bit of an easier book that I also think fits very well with February because Olympics. And it's Check Please. First book is called #Hockey. This has to do with this hockey club or hockey team at a university. So in the US, they have clubs or teams connected to their school, which is very weird to me. We don't have that here unless you specifically study, but not even then. You don't know. Okay, no, we don't have this. I really enjoyed this. You can count this as either the US because of the setting or Nigeria because the author, Ngozi Ukazu, is a Nigerian author. This is also queer, so it counts for the minority prompt. This also would count for the flag prompt if you read it for the US or Nigeria. Like if you read it for the US and Nigeria, you don't have to look for elements of the flag for both countries. You can just focus on one. But this has blue, red, and white, which are the colors of the American flag. So this counts for the US, Nigeria, minority, as well as flag prompt. Then we move on to a historical, also Nigerian novel. This is Under the Idolatries. This is set around the time of the Civil War of Nigeria, and we follow this main character who is lesbian, and it's very homophobic, and she goes through a lot of issues because she is gay. She is a queer girl. I think when it starts off she's a teenager, and we kind of follow her struggles with that in the whole religious aspect, so it can be very difficult to read. I know that it was very difficult at times for me to read it because of that, because of the homophobia in this. I was raised in an anti-religious family, so my upbringing is not at all similar to this. And when I say anti-religious, I don't mean atheist, I mean anti-religious. Everything that had to do with religion was the worst thing that could happen. My family was very anti-religious things. Religions were horrible and stuff like that, and I'm agnostic, so like I'm not bothered by that. But what I mean is I can't relate to the religious aspect of this. So maybe if you come from a very religious family and you're queer, you have a family member or friend who is queer, maybe this will be a little bit more difficult for you to read because you have another kind of relationship to religion than I have. But I still really enjoyed this. You can read this for Nigeria, and you can count this as both minority prompt as well as the flag prompt because Nigeria's flag is green and white. So you have green and the text is white. And I can just, for the flag prompt, any color you can find on the cover counts. Doesn't matter if it's this thing, like you can count this because it's on the cover. The text is on the cover. Everything that you can find on the cover, even a sticker, counts. So just clarifying that. Then I have another graphic novel, and this one I think is also very difficult, but it's illegal. And this book is about this boy from Ghana who travels with his brother and a few others through Northern Africa to make it as a refugee to Europe. And it's a very gripping story, a very hard to describe, but this impacted me a lot and I still think about this book. So I do really recommend it if you want to further your understanding of immigrants and immigration and refugees as a whole and those kinds of things. I really do recommend it. This is set in a lot of different countries. This is set in Ghana, Niger, Mali, Libya, and Italy. But the authors, Owen Colfer is Irish, Andrew Duncan is English from what I understand, and the guy who made this, Giovanni Regano, or Reggiano, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Regano, it should be, I think it's Regano. Giovanni Regano, he's Italian, so you can count this book for either, any of those countries. And also for the minority prompt, because I would count any immigration story as minority. So now I just want to mention a few books that I'm considering for the Globetrotterathon. So we have the Hakawati for Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon, Welcome to Lagos for Nigeria, and Ace of Spades for Nigeria and England. I also have a few authors that I've heard great things about, but I've never read anything from them and I haven't heard specific things from any of their books, but I figured maybe some of you are aware of them, so I wanted to give them a little shout out. So we have Petina Gapa, who is from Zimbabwe, Yagiasi, who is from Ghana and the US, Sakis Imda from South Africa, Aminata Forna from both Scotland and Sierra Leone, Akweki Emezi from Nigeria, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie from Nigeria and the US, and then Helen Oyeyemi from Nigeria and England. And I am so sorry if I butcher any of these pronunciations. I try looking up how to pronounce them, so I'm sorry if I mispronounced any of their names. But then we move on to Asia. And the first book that I have, or I can go ahead and do the two first books. So we have All the Rivers and The Lady from Tel Aviv. So both of these books have to do with Israel and Palestine. So this book, we have Dori Ravagnian is an Israeli woman, and this is a story about how she, when she was in the US, she fell in love with a Palestinian man. And from what I understand, this is based on a true event or something that actually, that she went through. So the Israeli woman is called Liat, and she is kind of happy with how it is in Israel. And she falls in love with a Palestinian guy called Hilmi, and he is not, of course, happy with how the whole situation is in Israel because of how Palestinians are treated. And I do like that neither of them ever agrees with the other side, that they're both like standing in their own opinion and sticking to it. I kind of think that's respectful to both sides, but I still found this very interesting. And then we have The Lady from Tel Aviv, which is a story about this Palestinian guy who hasn't been to Palestine in a very, very long time, and now he's going back to Palestine. And I did really enjoy this and the whole exploration of past and present, and the way that it was told, and that we get to see how it was to grow up in Palestine and how everything changed and what it's like for him to go back, and every change that has happened and how people kind of receive him now that he's back, and everything that he goes through, basically. So I find that very, very interesting. So this you can read for Palestine, Israel, and England. This you can read for Israel, Palestine, and the US. And both also count for a minority prompt. And this counts for the flag prompt because blue and white. And this counts for the Palestinian flag, which is red, white, and green. And this has all three of those colors. And black here. I forgot to mention the black. So both fits for minority and flag prompt. The next book is a book that I have talked about several times on my channel, and I think that no one is really surprised that I'm mentioning it. And it's Dating Makes Perfect, my favorite YA romance. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Like, this has to do with our main character, Winnie. She comes from this very traditional Thai family, and she has two older sisters who are twins, and they're set off to college, and Winnie's parents are like, you have to come back with husbands, and the twins are like, how? We were never allowed to date, so how can we find, boyfriends? And so the parents are like, you're right. So Winnie, now that you're in high school, you get to date, but not actually, we're gonna pick a suitable Thai boy for you to learn how to date with. So he's gonna teach you how to date, and the parents choose this guy who used to be Winnie's best friend, but something happened. They haven't talked since. So they kind of, in Winnie's opinion, they're kind of rivals or almost enemies, because he was super mean to her. Just suddenly they weren't friends. She doesn't understand why, so she thought that he hated her. So she did mean things to him and he did mean things to her, and it's very strange, but it was just a lot of fun to see their relationship, and like they're both such amazing characters, and I absolutely adore this book. I love how it integrated Thai culture as well. I thought that whole part of it was really beautiful. So you can read this for both minority, so you can read this for the US or Thailand, and I do recommend doing that. This was beautiful. I absolutely loved it. The next book we have is a manga, and it's I Hear the Sunspot. I personally love this series, and this first book I had to continue the series immediately after reading this, and I'm really happy that I did. The rest of the series is just phenomenal in my opinion, but I wanted to recommend this as well for Japan specifically. And this book follows this guy who doesn't really have a lot of money, and he's very stressed out and kind of desperate to find a job, and he sees these posters for being a note taker for a disabled person, or in this case someone with a hearing disability. So he goes out and he's like, I'm gonna be your note taker. And the two boys later, it's a boys love manga. It's very, very, very slow burn, so I'm just gonna say that. Nothing barely happens in the romance aspect, but it is a romance between these two boys, and it has great disability representation. So you can read this for Japan and for minority rep. The next book is a book that I also really enjoyed, but I don't have a physical copy of it, and it's Xoxo by Axio. And this book is about this girl. I think she's in high school. In the US, it's summer when it starts, and she is Korean American, and they have this karaoke bar, and this weird Korean guy who is super stylish is there, and he doesn't want to leave, and they kind of hit it off very well, this girl and this guy. And then she finds out that he is in a K-pop band, a very popular one, and he's not allowed to date. And because of circumstances, she and her mom has to go to South Korea to take care of the granny who is ill, and things happen. But you can read this for the US, South Korea, as well as minority rep. I don't remember if the cover has all the colors of the flag, but there was a lot of colors if I remember correctly, so probably. The next book we have is another immigrant story, and it's Inside Out and Back Again. Absolutely love this. This is a novel in verse, so it's a very quick read, and this is about this girl who grows up in Vietnam, and just when the Vietnam War starts, and she and her family has to move across the ocean or the Atlantic and go to the US. So they're immigrating to the US. She's in this whole new place, doesn't really understand a lot of things. The culture is really weird. People are acting really weird, and people are acting very weird to her specifically because she is Vietnamese. But I thought this was really beautiful, how this kind of depicted the journey, really, the whole immigrating thing. I thought this was really, really beautiful. So you can read this for Vietnam as well as the US, and of course also minority representation, and for the travel bonus prompt. Then we have another book that fits a lot of bonus prompts, and it's Kim Ji-young, born 1982. Absolutely love this. It's a very short book, and for me, this was easy to get through. This is about a girl called Kim Ji-young, and it kind of shows what it's like to be a woman in South Korea, what it's like to grow up as a girl and live as one in adulthood, and the social aspects of being a girl in South Korea. And even though I didn't grow up a girl in South Korea, I grew up a girl in Sweden, I could relate a lot to her, even though we're like 15 years apart. But I did find this very interesting interesting to read and I do recommend it. This fits for the prompts translated, flag because it has the white, blue and red on the flag as well as black. So you can count this as the flag prompt, minority prompt and translated prompt because this was originally written in Korean. So unless you're reading it in Korean, you can count it for the translated prompt. And then we have another hard gripping graphic novel, and it's They Called Us Enemy by George Takei. This is about what it was like to be Japanese American during the 1940s, during World War II, when they were pushed into concentration camps. I use the term concentration camps because it's the term that is used in the book, even though today we usually talk about those camps as internment. But George Takei refers to them as concentration camps, and that's why I do that as well. But this was really beautiful, and how this was told, like the format of this being a graphic novel was very well done in the fact that we get to see George Takei as a very young boy in these camps and what that was like and how his parents treated the whole thing, how they acted and reacted to everything that was happening. It was a very tough time. I understand that when being Japanese American wasn't very good. I mean, the title says it all, They Call Us Enemy. I do really recommend this. I thought this was really well done. And this is another book that you can read for the minority representation. I could also say that travel would work as well. And I forgot to mention Japanese and the US. You can count it for Japanese and the US. The next book is When My Name Was Kyoko, one of my favorite historical fiction books ever. And this has to do with what it was like being Korean in Korea when Korea belonged to Japan. And very quickly in the book, the Japanese government, I think even the emperor said that if you're Korean, you have to take a Japanese name because you're Japanese now. So we follow this family when the girl in the family, when her name was Kyoko. So the whole book is during the time when her name was Kyoko, which is also why it's relatively short. But it's in the 1940s and we follow this girl and her brother and what they go through individually and together as a family. And it was just such a beautiful story. It's very easy to get through. The chapters are very short, so it is very easy to get through, easy to read, and it's very hard-hitting to understand what they went through and what life was like being Korean during this time. But you can also read this for the minority prompt and for South Korea and Japan. The next book is one of my favorite books of all time, and it's The Kite Runner. I have it in Swedish. In Swedish it's Flyga drake. But this is by Charlott, and I absolutely adore this story about this boy in Afghanistan who is kind of a different class than his neighbor and best friend. So they're kind of, I think it's described as them having two different ethnicities. So they are of different rank in that way. So the best friend is even seen as a server boy to this richer boy who we're following, and they're called Amia and Hassan. Hassan is the server boy and Amia is the higher class or higher rank boy from a richer family. They both lost their moms and they're best friends. They've been best friends for a very long time, but things happen and their friendship is put to test, and we get to see later things that will happen to them as adults and the whole thing that Afghanistan goes through with Russia and wars and just a lot of things. But I thought that this was very beautiful because this gave a different perspective on Afghanistan and life in Afghanistan that not a lot of people are aware of. And you can read this for Afghanistan and the US. And the next book that I have is the Hana Wars that you can read for Bangladesh, Ireland, or Brazil, because this girl is Brazilian, so you can count it as that. And this is Sapphic, and it has to do with henna. It has to do with Bangladeshi and South Asian culture, which I thought was really well done. You can count this for the minority prompt. Then, as always, I have a few books that I haven't read but that I am considering reading for the GLOBETROTTERATHON. The first one is Brother's Keeper. This has to do with these two siblings traveling through North Korea, which I think sounds really, really interesting. So you can read this for North Korea as well as the US. I would also say that this counts for the minority prompt as well as the travel prompt, but also the flag prompt. Because even if the shades of blue aren't, you know, the same clear blue as the flag or the red and stuff like that, it still counts. Any shade of the color counts. Then we have Pachinko, which I think has a lot of similarities to When My Name Was Kyoko, except that this is rather big. I think this is over 500 pages. But this also has to do with a Korean family in Japan and what it's like to be Korean in Japan. And from what I understand, this is also a generational story. So it follows different generations and what it's like from being first generation to second and so on, from what I understand of it. But I think it sounds really interesting. And I did really love When My Name Was Kyoko, so maybe I would really love this as well. You can read this for South Korea, Japan, and the US. The next, we have another queer story, another queer historical, and it's Swimming in the Monsoon Sea. And you can read this for Sri Lanka and Canada because the author is Sri Lankan and Canadian. This is set in Sri Lanka in the 1980s following a queer boy. I have tried picking it up several times. I have really enjoyed it, but I just forgot what it was about. I had put it on pause for such a long time that I forgot what I had read, so I had to DNF it. But hopefully I can pick it up this time. The next book is A Land of Permanent Goodbyes. This is also kind of an immigrant refugee story, if I remember correctly. And for this book, you can count Afghanistan, Syria, Turkey, and Greece. The next one is one of my most anticipated releases of 2021, and it's Dial A for Aunties. This sounds so funny. This sounds so funny. Like, we have these women who work as different, like they have a company connected to weddings, if I remember correctly. And our main girl, she is on a date and the guy accidentally dies. She accidentally murders him or something like that. And she calls her aunties and they have to hide the body while doing a lot of preparation for weddings. And it sounds hilarious. And from what I understand, like, a lot of people love this book. So I'm really interested in reading it. And you can read this for Indonesia, Singapore, China, and the US. And the last book that I have for Asia is one that I am considering because I really enjoy the other book by this author, and it's Honey and Ish's Guide to Fake Dating. So it's Sapphic, it's Bangladeshi, and it's fake dating, which I think all of those sound really, really fun. So I am definitely considering reading this. So just as with the Hana Wars, you can count this for Bangladesh and Ireland. Then we move on to Europe, and I tried to only bring up books with multiple countries, like a book that is connected to multiple countries, because you can count up to 2 countries per book. But I wanted to bring this book up because I really, really loved it, and it's Aromelia by Vidas Hjort, and this in English is Will and Testament. This has to do with this woman who is a child of toxic parents, and so because of that I really, really related to the story. And we follow her as an adult with kids and grandkids and going through the problems caused by her parents and family, a toxic family, as her dad is dead and they have to work through his will and the testament, you know, like all of that. So I really do enjoy this, and it does have translations to a lot of different languages. It is a book from Norway, so you can count it from Norway, and the flag prompt from the bonus prompt also works. The next book is the book with the most country settings out of the whole bunch that I'm talking about today, and it's How to Stop Time by Matt Haig. I adored this book. I think I gave it 4 stars. I love this book. Really, really loved it. This book is set in 7 different countries. So you can count 7 countries, like you can count Q, but if you've read 5, if you have 5 other books for the other 5 countries, you can count the last 2 for this. This is set in England, Sri Lanka, the US, France, Tahiti, Dubai, and Australia. So quite a lot of them. So I am positive it can fit the flag prompt for any of these countries. But this is about this guy who has an illness or a situation that makes him age a lot slower than anyone else, or than normal people. So he is, I think, over 500 years old, but it's only because he ages so slowly. So where he is in the present, he looks to be in his mid-40s when he's actually over 500 years old. So I think it's really, really interesting, and I really, really enjoyed this book a lot. It also has to do with a conspiracy and finding his long-lost daughter, and just, I love this book really, really much. Then I have a book that I loved last year, one of my favorite travel romances of all time, and it's Summer on a Sunny Island set in Malta. This also, like, this was beautiful. Like, the whole setting of this, the atmosphere of this was really, really beautiful. I've never been to Malta, but this makes me really want to go there, even though I don't really like warm places. But I would love to go to Malta because of this book. But you can count this for Malta as well as England, and it also fits the travel prompt as well as the flag prompt. The next book is another book that I loved but that I don't own physically, and it's Just for Show by Jay. This is a lesbian fake dating romance. We have this woman who is a businesswoman who is a couples therapist, but she is single, and she has a book coming out, but no one would want to buy her book if she's single, because how can you trust a couples therapist who is single? So she looks for an actress to pay to be her fiance. So she finds this girl, and they fake date, and they stop fake dating and start real dating, and it's beautiful. Like, it's so fun. I have loved every single Jay book I have picked up, and you can count this for both the US as well as Germany, because Jay is German. So that's really fun. Always looking to shout out any German queer authors out there, but I do really recommend any book from Jay, really, but Just for Show was one that I really, really loved. And the last book that I want to talk about for Europe is The House with a Stained Glass Window. This is a book about the history of Ukraine, and this was really interesting. Like, we follow this family and through different times that kind of goes from Russian occupation to independence, and it just goes through so many different things, and art is an essential part of it, or a central part of it. But there's just, like, this was such an interesting book to read, and I feel like I learned so much about Ukraine, and I feel like also because of the situation being what it is in Ukraine today, I do really recommend reading this for that as well. So then we move on to North America. And the first book that I want to recommend is Clap When You Land, and this is another of these novels in verse. I don't know how well you saw that little flip through, but this has to do with these two girls, one who lives in the Dominican Republic and the other who lives in the US, and they are sisters, but they have never heard about each other until the day that their dad goes from the US by airplane to travel to his second family in the Dominican Republic and dies because the plane crashes in the ocean. This event of losing their dad kind of makes both of their lives completely derail, and then they learn about the other, and things happen, and it's just such an interesting read. And how, like, the family dynamics of this was also very fun to kind of to read about, very interesting. And these two girls who are sisters, both of their situation I find was so interesting and so well written as well. The format of this being a novel in verse I thought was very beautiful and really added something to the story. And you can read this for the US as well as the Dominican Republic. The next book I want to mention is another book that is only one country, but I still wanted to bring it up, and it's Idolatries by Darcy Little Badger. And this has to do with Native American mythology, and we follow a Native American family or a Native American girl called Idolatries, and there's also a murder mystery, paranormal kind of murder mystery in this. I didn't know if I would fit it into this recommendations video or the sci-fi and fantasy one, but I decided I'm gonna include it here instead. But I do really recommend this. I'm not so much for the kind of mystery that was in this, so I didn't really get the most out of it as other people could have. Olive who enjoyed the genre more, but I still really enjoyed it and still would recommend it. So you can read this for the US and definitely count it for the minority prompt. The next book is one of my favorite romance books, and it's the Honeymooners. This is a fake dating story. So we have Olive and Ethan, and they are the siblings to this newlywed couple who are set to go to a Polynesian island for their honeymoon, except that they are food poisoned. And the only way to go to this honeymoon and not have the tickets wasted and the money wasted is to send someone with the same last name as the newlywed couple. So Olive, being the sister of the bride, and Ethan being the brother of the bride, shares the last names of their siblings, so they have to go together. And they pretend to be newlyweds while despising each other. And I thought that this was really fun. I loved the dynamic between the two. It was just so much fun. Like, this was so much fun. I love this book. And you can read this for the US, but you can count it for both North America as well as Oceania, because the Hawaiian Islands are geographically part of Oceania. And so because of that, I would count it for that as well as North America. The same goes if you read a book set in Russia, and the part of Russia that it's set in is both in the European part and the Asian part. Even though it's one country, you can count for two continents, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to make that clear. So you can read this for the US, but you can count two continents for it. The next book I have is This Time Will Be Different by Mrs. Fiora. This was beautiful. I love this book. This also deals with the Japanese internment camps, the same way that they call this Enemy Dead. So you can read this for both Japan and the US. I decided to include it in the American or the North American section because it's set in the US, but you can count Japan as well. And we follow this girl who doesn't have a lot of things going for her, apart from when she learns about this company having done very unjust things towards Japanese Americans in the past, in the 1940s, during the whole thing with the internment camps. She gets so passionate about this issue that she basically starts a movement for the justice of Japanese Americans and the families of the people who were badly treated back in the day. And as I said, you can count this for Japan and the US. This also fits the minority prompt as well as the flag prompt, because we have some blue flowers, some red, and some white. So you can count it for the flag of Japan and the flag of the US. Then we have a romance book that I really enjoyed, and it's The Kiss Quotient by Helen Wong. And we follow this girl or this woman. Girl makes it sound like it's YA. It's very adult. The guy is an escort, by the way. But we follow a woman who is just businesswoman, and she is really cool. She has Asperger's, and she feels like she doesn't really understand a lot. It has to do with dating. She doesn't really see the point, but her parents want grandkids. She hires this escort to teach her how to be a good girlfriend and then to be a good wife. And the guy is Vietnamese as well as Swedish. You can count the book for Vietnam and Sweden as well as the US if you want to. It also fits the minority prompt. And you can also count it for the flag, because yellow and blue is the flag of Sweden. The next book I have is The Ex Talk, which is these two people who do not like each other have to pretend that they used to date. So it's not fake dating, it's fake dated, that they pretend that they have dated, but they don't. And they have this radio show where they talk as if they have been together, but they're not. And in the background, they're falling in love. So they have to both pretend that they broke up a while ago while falling in love and wanting to date for the first time. And you can count this for the minority prompt because she is Jewish and he is Korean. So she's Jewish American, he is Korean American. You can also count it for South Korea as well as the US. And the last book I want to talk about for North America is Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe. You can read this for both the US and Mexico because the Aristotle and Dante are both Mexican American. I think that the author is also Mexican American, if I remember correctly. But this is a queer story, so you can also count it for the minority prompt. This is a very slow burn best friends to lovers. I don't feel like it's a spoiler to say that because this has been around for such a long time now that if you haven't heard about this being queer, I don't know what to tell you. But then we move on to Oceania. And the first book that I want to talk about is a book that I have this in German, but it has the same name in English. And it's Putiki by Patricia Grace. This has to do with Maori and native New Zealander mythology, folklore, and culture. So it's very interesting, and it also has to do with the issues that the Maori face in New Zealand on their own land because of white people coming and trying to push them away. So it was very interesting to read. I do recommend this. This is not really a book recommendation, it's more an author recommendation, and it's because one of my favorite male romance authors is Australian, and it's Anna Walker. So we have my absolute favorite from her is the Spencer Cohen series, book 1. The entire trilogy is called the Spencer Cohen series book, and then 1, 2, or 3. But I really love this. It's about this guy who is Australian, but he moved to the US, works in this tattoo parlor, and his job is to fake date men because of different reasons. So they pay him to pretend to date them. And he also has a history of being a child of toxic parents, which made him so relatable to me. Like, I cried several times because it was just so relatable to me that I couldn't hold emotions in. I felt like he and I were the same person almost. But he is approached by this guy called Andrew, and Andrew wants to make his ex jealous. So he hires Spencer and they fake date and The other book that I have by Anna Walker that I wanted to just mention is Finders Keepers, and it's about this guy moving. This is entirely set in Australia. The first book is set in only the US, but this one is set in Australia, and we have this guy who relocates and finds a dog, and then it's the romance between him and the owner of the dog, and it's really cute. It's really cute in my opinion. And the last book that I want to talk about for Oceania is Along for a Ride. I haven't read this, but I am considering reading this for the GLOBETROTTERATHon. The guy is from Tonga, which is an oceanic country or island. So he's from Tonga, and this involves travel, so you can read it for the travel prompt as well as the minority prompt. But you can read this for Tonga as well as the US. Okay, so we're moving on to South America. And the first book that I have to recommend is The Gods of Tango. And this is set in Italy as well as Argentina, so you can count it for both if you want to. And this is about this girl who is Italian, and she kind of has her husband called Dante, and they're supposed to move to Argentina together. This is set in the beginning of the 1900s when a lot of people immigrated from Italy to Argentina, if I remember correctly, or if I understand correctly. But arriving in Argentina, she finds out that this guy Dante is dead, and being a woman in this new country is not as easy, being, you know, a widow. So she assumes the identity of her late husband and lives as a boy. And this has a lot to do with realizing your gender identity and kind of finding who you are when you don't have anyone who have these expectations of you, because she doesn't have any connection to her family anymore. The only person that she knew in Argentina was Dante, who is dead. So she gets to start over and live her life really however she sees fit. So this is a very queer story, and I really enjoyed it. So you can read this for Argentina and Italy and count it also for the minority prompt. And the last book that I want to talk about is a book that I am personally considering reading for South America, for the GLOBETROTTERATHon, and it's Sweet Hand, because Sweet Hand is set in Trinidad, and Trinidad is part of South America. It is both set there, and the author is Trinidadian and she lives in Trinidad. So this is entirely, from what I understand, it is entirely set in Trinidad, and it sounds beautiful and it looks gorgeous. Like, look at this cover. This is one of the most stunning covers I've ever seen. Like, it's gorgeous. Like, look at him looking at her. Look at him looking at her. Like, she's so cute, and he likes it. I love this cover. I think it looks stunning. It's a romance and it looks absolutely gorgeous. It also involves a wedding, which I find very interesting. So I'm considering reading this for the GLOBETROTTERATHon. I am planning next week on Tuesday, I think, I'm going to put out my own GLOBETROTTERATHon TBR, so you can look at it for that. But those were all of the recommendations that I have for contemporary and historical books for each of the different continents. Please let me know if you have any recommendations. Link them down below, write about them, and what continent and country and all of that. Would be a lot of fun to collect all of the recommendations that we can get. There are only 2 weeks left until GLOBETROTTERATHon starts, which is so weird to me. But thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. And until next time, good reading. Bye.